Last week, during our segment on boozing through the week, we talked about China, which kind of took over the entire podcast. And I have to tell you about a daydream I had. When I run, I daydream. I think about my stories, I think about winning the Stanley Cup, and I think about teaching my daughter soccer. That's it. But last week, after we had that podcast, I went for a run and I had this bizarre dream where, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, well, that's not how you say his name, it's Justin Trudeau, he has a conference with Xi Jinping, right? So they go up there and daydream. This is my mind just kind of going off on stuff. And he stands up there to announce some trade agreement or some hogwash with Beijing. And then as he's giving the speech, someone comes up to him and goes, "It's done." And then Justin Trudeau turns to Xi Jinping and goes, "Xi Jinping, you're under arrest." And stands there in front of the podium and lists like all the things that he's done, like the internment of the Uyghurs, all the stuff he's doing against the protesters. And because that's just getting worse and worse every single day. Wow. And I just had this daydream about like him getting arrested on a stage in front of everybody. I mean, you can't arrest the president of a country like that, but it's something that's just like permeating a lot of what I think about, because also the two Michaels, the Canadian Michaels that they have arrested over there. So I had this huge daydream about when the guy in the Canadian government comes up and tells them it's done, they were able to extract the Michaels from the prisons and then arrest Xi Jinping safely, and then the whole world order would be reestablished and we could all just take a sigh of relief. That's what I dreamt. That was my daydream. Fucking weird.
I don't see any loose ends with that at all.
No, it's perfect, Brett. It's
I don't see
absolutely
any,
perfect.
I don't see anyone getting assassinated. I don't see anyone going to jail for that.
No.
I don't see any plutonium tipped canes suddenly tapping Justin's leg.
No, I don't know, because they sent a secret operative team of like 6.5 people. No, it's a hockey team, so it's a lineup. It's 5 men and a goalie, and they go into Xi Jinping, into Beijing, get them and knock out all the nuclear weapons.
And he looks at these giant bearded backwoodsmen who clobber each other on the ice, and he goes, I didn't order anything. Get the fuck out of my suite. Get out of here. Where'd you
So,
come from?
the question that I
And
wanted to ask you last week, which we didn't do, was very quickly: would China have imposed its national security law if somebody else was president?
Well, Xi Jinping is rather unique, isn't he?
I meant
Well,
in
at least
America.
in the last few years.
I meant in
Oh,
America. If you had if you had Obama in charge, for instance, or another president.
oh yeah, I think this would have happened
I do too.
without Trump. I mean, China has Xi Jinping in particular has been angling for something like this for quite some time,
Yeah.
and in some sense, he's building on the work of his predecessors in eroding Hong Kong
Mm.
Cantonese autonomy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think this is true. I don't think we can pin this one on Trump.
No, no, I wasn't trying to do that. I was just trying to
Much
say
as I
about like
want to.
about cultural influences well,
It's the greatest national security law. It's a tremendous law.
if that man
President
say,
Xi.
if that man
Oh,
says
sure.
very one more time, I swear to God, we
Oh,
gotta punch his English teacher in the face.
oh, I wouldn't go around threatening the president if I were you there, Mr. Canadian. I wouldn't go around doing
And so
that.
now on to this week of boozing through the week. This week of boozing through the week, we have one name. We're gonna put a timer on the clock of, let's do 7 minutes now because I've already wasted a lot of it. And the first name on the docket for today is Roger Stone.
Oh my God. Oh, who the fuck is this Taylor? I know it's a superficial comment, I know, but Jesus. He's dressed like I read an article.
Uh,
The writer described him as dressing like an upper class twit from Monty Python.
where did you
It's just
see that? That's
I forget. You just click on things that look interesting, and I only check the website. I check it as not as often as I should.
It's a good thing that you mentioned his clothing because it's a part of his shtick, and it is kind of a
Well, yeah,
shtick.
this idea of projecting. Yeah, look, I'm harmless. Look, I'm an idiot. Look, I'm a
Oh,
goofball.
you
You
think
don't you
so?
don't need
Huh.
to take me serious.
Mm,
That was the journalist contention, or at least whoever.
mm,
Actually, yes, it was a journalistic piece. It wasn't an editorial,
mm.
but that was the writer's surmise. It's like,
Right.
hey, look, I'm an idiot.
Uh,
Meanwhile, he's actively collaborating with Russian operatives with the consent of the White House
that
to
doesn't mean
get
he's not
dirt on.
an idiot, though, right? I
No,
read an
that's exactly the writer's point.
uh,
That it's an act. It's an act.
well,
Yeah.
I remember watching a documentary or reading something in the New Yorker that said that it's debatable about even how effective he is as a political operative. Like,
Mm,
it's debatable that he's been ever good at his job.
mm.
You know, he is weird in the sense that he's a political operative, but his hero is Nixon, and his the guy that he kind of emulates himself after is like Henry Kissinger. You know, like he picked up the swinging. He wanted to have this distractive personality, like you said about the clothing, right? You know, like he took on the Henry Kissinger was a swinger, and he liked to promote that as like a form of to make himself a celebrity, but also to kind of distract. And he did the same thing.
I have never
Stone.
been one to ignore the attentions of women. I have always appreciated women to coming to my hotel room when I wear my 1920s zoot suit.
Oh, excuse me, sir.
That was my best
Do,
kissing her.
do the
But you know,
women enjoy your dial tone of a voice?
I don't have any comment. Thank you very much. But it's this idea. There's a I don't know Roger Stone from anyone else. I don't know, but there's a pleasure, isn't there, in scheming. There's a certain type of human being who enjoys. And
The
when you think about it,
Machiavellian?
the average American, no matter what he or she looks like, feels pretty powerless right now. And, I'm sure there was a time in Roger Stone's life when he felt similarly outside of any sort of having any bearing on politics. Nixon, Kissinger, these people can do what they want.
Uh-huh.
Well, up to a certain point. Nixon got caught, but up to a certain point, they can do whatever they want as long as they're scheming, as long as they're keeping out of the public eye. There's something fun about it. There's something you get this juice from it.
You feel
I don't know.
powerful. There's this mischievous quality to him and to what he does. He's been in politics since like a babe, right? Like he was on the Republican youth committees and things like that, and he worked with Nixon, and he was in the Watergate scandal. He was involved in that. Not like all the president's men, but his name was on a board at one point. I can't remember off the top of my head, but man, it's very corrupt. Like he's been pardoned, right? That's why he's in boozing through the week. He's been pardoned, which is just ridiculous. After the Department of Justice lowered his recommended sentence from like 8 years to 40
40 months,
months.
something like that. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and
Three
then
years.
and then the White House's statement on it is, it sounds like it was written by Trump, which you should not do.
It's a witch hunt, It's just another example of the liars coming after my people. Right? What I love about Roger Stone, what is it? Robert Mueller's investigation has been proven to be false. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't.
Yeah, no,
It
that's
was not.
ridiculous.
It's not what the impeachment was
Mm,
about. It's not what the conclusion of the impeachment trial
mm.
was.
Yeah,
Anyway,
no, that was a whole, like I can't believe you're allowed to say that in an official brief from the White House.
well, you
Next name on the
can't.
list. Oh, and of course he's got that famous Nixon tattoo on his back. It's like the size of his back. Number
Just, I mean, the man's a very interesting persona, to say the least.
number two, Mayor Park Won-soon. Did you hear about this? The
No,
Seoul
what
Mayor.
Said the mayor of Seoul? Yeah. What do you
Yeah,
do?
committed.
What did he not do?
He killed himself. Right? He committed suicide. He died by suicide
When
on Friday, last Friday. You didn't hear about this? It's very
did he
big
leave a
news.
note?
Huh?
Did he leave a note? Did
Yeah,
he leave
but
a note?
yes, he did. His note is like, "I'm sorry," but the day he committed suicide, after his secretary had filed sexual harassment claims against him.
Oh.
And he was a man that championed women's rights and this kind of stuff. And apparently he sexually harassed her for years. 4 years.
What did he apologize for? For that or for mishandling the coronavirus response? Or
No.
was he just apologetic about harassing his secretary? Not just, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, he didn't mention the reason why in his thing, right? But in Korea, once you commit suicide, it ends all the investigation, right? So this ends the shame that his family would get. He doesn't have to admit to being guilty or having done it or defending himself. And it's divided people, right? Like, people are mourning him, and then you got women's rights activists who are clearly upset about this because there's no investigation. The woman now has to, the person, his secretary, has to live with the fact that he just fucking killed himself because he was, I'm gonna say, he's a coward. He did this. He's a coward.
He couldn't take his licks. Yeah.
He couldn't. He didn't want to admit to it. And his family, he tried to save his family shame or whatever. It's preposterous. It makes me. It's not preposterous, but it's awful. Like, it's just terrible that this woman now has to live with this, and the fact that Seoul is now fighting over, people in Seoul. You know, those who support him and mourn him. I've had people come up to tell me, "You don't know the full story." Oh, there goes our timer. And try to say, she needed to use her rights. She needed to, and she did. She actually apparently tried to go to City Council, City Hall, to complain about it a few months ago. But apparently, it's his office. They tried to protect him, apparently.
Of course they did. Of course they did. That's the source of their power.
Mm-hmm.
The source of their job. It's not her, him.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they circled the wagons around him, I'm sure. I don't know this for a fact, but it doesn't take much.
And for context, for our readers, being the mayor of Seoul is putting you in a good position to become president. And being the mayor of Seoul...
There's been a few precedents for that.
Yeah. Lee Myung-bak, for sure.
Myung-bak, for sure, yeah.
And he is considered the second most powerful man, or was second most powerful man in Korea, after the president. So it's big news. And man, I just feel, what a coward. That's all I can think of. And I can tell you that personally. I'm not saying I'm not a coward. I'm just saying, wow, like...
I want to live in a world where men don't do that, but that's not the world we live in. Where I'm not convinced that killing yourself is an act of cowardice. I'm not. I can't call him a coward as unequivocally as you can. It's just such an awful situation for her.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's an awful situation for him too, and beat me up if you want, but the man's fucking dead. Killed himself. And the thing, if he sexually harassed her, that's not a capital crime, hardly in any country. And so how he punished himself is in a way far worse than any punishment maybe he would have gotten in this life. It's it's horrible for both of them. It's just for what? Because his balls were too heavy. He had too much fucking cum. It's just why, just power. Is that what men do when they're in power, and some women too? Like, you hear stories, is this just what power, is this the surplus value of power you get? You sexually bully your subordinates? Is that, I don't know. This could lead us into a discussion of, that would include Trump, Xi Jinping, everybody. It's just power. What does power do to a human being? What is it? You're this finite, you're this bag of water that's running down at all times, constantly has to eat things to keep itself going, shitting, pissing, and all of a sudden, other human beings say, we defer to you now. Go ahead, do what you got to do for us. But, we're also understand that you're going to do a few things for yourself. That's the nature of power. and then you're just like, all right,
Take.
I'm gonna press my secretary against the wall and fucking breathe on her for a
Mm.
bit, or I'm gonna fucking steal taxpayer, all the weird shit that I'm gonna kill.
Mm.
I'm gonna have people just where did
I look at it like it even the ascension through work. You know, you work at a store, you become the manager, you become an owner or whatnot, and how you start viewing people, right?
yeah
You view them as employees, as parts of your machine, and then you fire them. You say, well, I can't. We shouldn't give pay raises because that cuts down our bottom line. But what you're actually saying is, I'm going to deprive the people who work with me money. Like that's a huge power balance, and it's unfair.
sure
Like I see it as kind of the same thing. And I want to be clear. I'm not saying that committing suicide is cowardly, not at all, not necessarily. I just think, but I'm also I can be changed on calling him like a complete coward like that. I just feel it's a way out.
he robbed her of justice. I see what your point, I think, is if I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
I agree that he robbed her of
Mm,
justice,
mm. And
but at a tremendous price to himself.
yeah,
And you could say, he's a political animal,
mm,
so if he couldn't make president, it's just as good as death. Can you
that's
say that? I don't know.
yeah.
I don't know if you can say that for somebody else.
I'm pretty sure he had a nice cushy house somewhere in like
Mm.
Itaewon or outside of the
Yeah,
Gyeonggi-do where he could just
the,
live in
the
retirement.
Parasite, the house they used in Parasite,
Yeah,
like a house like that, where it's just like all windows.
I
There's like
haven't
a
seen
grass.
it. I
You
haven't
haven't
seen it.
seen it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
Wow.
I haven't seen anything,
Wow.
man. I've been watching Defy Blood 15 minutes a night on my handphone. Like I don't see shit. I'm like, oh, this is kind of neat. I wonder if it's any good. This 15-minute segment was enjoyable. I don't know, man. The last name on my list. Fuck it. Let's just get into the story. Okay. The last one on my list that I wanted to mention was hockey's back, baby.
Oh shit.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh shit.
Yeah, yeah. Leave
Oh,
pride. The reason why I wanted to mention is not so much hockey is the fact that hockey's coming back, right? We got games coming. And I didn't
yeah.
realize how happy I was about that. And not because like weeks ago you asked me, I said, fuck the season. Fuck hockey. We're dying of like coronavirus, right? And this is my church, baby. This is where
That's your church.
I kneel at the altar of Wayne Gretzky. But man, this past few weeks have been depressing. Like even though we're in Jeju and things are relatively good here, having a little bit of a sport, a distraction, not a bad thing, man. And so
Mhm.
we're fine, we're good. We can go outside, and other people can't. So I imagine how nice it would be for them to have for other people. Like I'm a little bit on like let's try to get something going like this to give people something to look forward to, right? I don't know. You feel the same way about your
Well, I'm just
sport?
curious as to what the
Your sport.
threshold is for infection.
Yeah.
Like what would pull the plug on the season? I'm curious about that because
Well,
of course let's play hockey if it's safe.
yeah. Well,
Sure.
they're
But
being in
safe,
Canada.
relatively speaking,
Yeah.
this is a sport where you normally punch people in the fucking head. Like
Concussions, broken femurs.
just
Yeah.
it's just what kind of it's this great we love everyone, eh? And then it's like motherfucker, like it's just bang grabbing jerseys. There's like blood in people's beards. These giant testosterone roiled fucking mountain men pounding on each other.
My boy Nazem Kadri, my boy, when
Oh,
he was with the Maple Leafs, he got into a fight a couple years ago with Joe Thornton, Big Jimbo Joe they call him because he's huge, and he has this beard.
Jimbo Joe. Oh God, he's got a knife in his beard.
He used to
Pulls it
play
out.
for Boston, and now he played for San Jose, and he has this massive beard now, like it's this like Billy
Yeah.
Goat type thing. And Nazem Kadri grabbed it, and at the end of the fight, you see him drop it, and he had clump of like dried detritus and just dropped it on
His
the
his
ice.
he used the beard as like a shirt, like how you would use a
Well, because
shirt
it was
in the
so
fight.
long. Yeah, he grabbed
So
it right
long.
there.
Tried to grab the shirt, got a handful of a hair apron hanging from this guy's chin.
And then with that, ladies and gentlemen, shall we pose, Brett?
Well, congratulations, up by the way, on your. Oh yes, yes.
No, 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 no. Well,
Make a point.
Signing off this week on Boozing Through Lit. Fuck a duck.
all right, let's go.
I love how you did that where like you just pause the video for a second so people can see how silly we look. You know what? This is terrible. Let me just say something really quickly. When Jocko Willink, the Navy SEAL, has a discussion about horrible things, it's black and white. His voice is this poignant basso profundo. Good evening, Echo. Good evening, Jocko. Jocko Willink podcast, and he's just a tremendous man. You know what I mean? Like he's got no neck. You know, he's talking about really horrible things that human beings have done to one another. We're acting a little bit silly, but trust us, dear listeners. You know, we are in a frame of mind to discuss the story that we are going to discuss.
Yeah.
Do you want to start us off, my friend? Those beautiful intros that you write?
Yeah, well, hopefully I try. Now, what I knew about the Rwandan genocide before reading this story could have been essentially summarized in two facts. That the Hutus were killing the Tutsis, and that it happened in 1994. And those facts are essentially the same two facts I left from reading Grief by Scholastique Kukasonga, a Rwandan author who now lives in France. But one does not read fiction for facts. Newspapers are where facts live. In fiction, you look for the truth. And this story, rather unconventional in many ways, the title gives you the whole thing. It's about grief. But the grief of the story is acutely personal, about something must be learned that sentence doesn't make any sense. It's about grief of a nameless Rwandan woman exiled in France over the murder of the Tutsis family, but also the grief of being alone in a world where a segment of it tried to take away your identity. The story starts off with her being alone, as she almost anticipates being told her family is dead. And when she does find out, seeking the comfort of community, but finding she is alone in France. For most part, the story breaks that hard-etched rule of writing, of show, don't tell. Much of this is just straight up being told to the reader. It is also written in the third person so close over the nameless main character's shoulder, the gap between narrator and character is almost invisible, creating this odd, interesting, distant intimacy. One can easily swap the pronoun of she for the pronoun of I, and the story still works. Trust me, I tried. Kukasonga said her heroine represents all those Tutsis who left Rwanda in the exodus that began in the 1960s, and about their grieving and absence those killed at home. The piece is full of references to ritual as integral aspects of grieving. It beautifully explains to its Western readers Rwandan grieving rituals while alluding to Western examples to aid its themes. Her character is in exile, thrown into a purgatory of sorts, when she is told by a letter that her entire family back home has all been killed. And she attempts to deal with her grief in France, but the pain is too much and she lacks the strength of community. She attends the funerals of others and wails with them over the dead she doesn't know. She eventually goes back to Rwanda to find her family and is met by a keeper of the dead of sorts, a man imbued with an otherworldly quality, a Cerberus, to be exact. He tells her that she has now gone through the end, and there is nothing beyond that, and the dead live in her. In this episode of Boozing Through the New Yorker, she imagined them beyond a veil of tears, nearby and unreachable. Maybe that's why she'd go so far away, so that there would be someone to weep for all those whose memory the killers had tried to erase. Grief by Scholastique Kukasonga.
Nicely done. Very nice. You know, it's this another powerful story. In fact, I think this is perhaps this is the story that really shook me the most than the ones that we've read so far. It's just so fucking true. I like that you use that word truth early on in your description, in your précis. It just shook me. It was, you have a woman who it's very hard for her to get upstairs. She's lethargic. She's depressed. She obsessively cleans her room to make sure that everything's in place. She can only read the death letter once. And it's not really much of a letter, is it? It's just written in composition paper.
It's a list.
It's a list. It's just, it has a short sentence explaining what it is, and it just lists literally every family member she ever had. Cousins, nephews, sisters, parents. They're all gone. You know, and she, like you said earlier, she knew it was coming. She could just tell. And I just, I don't, obviously I want to build up to the denouement, the climax. The climax is just so shocking. I didn't see it coming. But just this idea that you know, when you grieve, I mean, it's hard for any of us to imagine losing our closest family members at one time. But perhaps if it was a plane crash where everything was done to ameliorate or mitigate that accident from happening, if it was an accident in the best of circumstances, if such a thing exists. But in airlines, you have, you know, redundancies, you have checks, check after check after check. You have a highly trained workforce running these things. So if an airplane crash happens, they look at it, they study it for years, to try to make sure it never happens again. So if you lost all your family members in a plane crash, conceivably, you would only be confronted with the senselessness of chance, which is a horrible thing in and of itself to be confronted with. But when your neighbors murder and rape and torture all those family members, your neighbors, and you had a presentiment of it before, that's why you left, because perhaps you were tired of hearing nursery rhymes saying, you know, who are those Tutsis we used to hear about? Oh, don't worry about them. They're all gone. Before the genocide, knowing that the genocide had been building for a long time. And it's interesting that the Tutsi word for what she believed happened is a word reserved for pests. It's not, genocide implies a murder of human beings based on ethnic, based on a totality of a certain group, like an entire group of human beings getting wiped out. When the word that she uses is a word normally is used to like eradicate pests, cockroaches. It's even worse in that
that's
way.
Interesting.
The Hutus were looked at the Tutsis as not human. They infested their country, which apparently is rhetoric that is often used by would-be
genocidal maniacs.
Genocidal maniacs to justify to their populace what they're about to do. It's just that much worse. It's
interesting that you mentioned that, because she starts off the piece talking about how Western media. I fixated on the start and on how she starts it and how she builds to the she in the story, because she doesn't have like I said, the main character doesn't have a name, but it starts off talking about Western media will not call it a genocide. Right? They won't even, because massacres happen there all the time. And when you mention the fact that the Tutsi, that they called the Tutsis, cockroaches, that was the word that the Hutus had for them, it connects directly to the fact that the Western media, Westerners wouldn't even call it a genocide. It almost kind of keeps us culpable in it for not admitting to what was happening.
Well, certainly the West, which had a considerable amount of power in the region at the time, did next to nothing. There was a hero from your country, actually, Captain Romeo Dallaire, who who was the head of the patchwork UN security forces, and he tried so he and his men tried so fucking hard to hold the two Hutus back, and they just couldn't. They were overwhelmed. In fact, a few Dutch peacekeepers were caught, murdered, to scare the Dutch into pulling their troops out from the UN Expeditionary Force, or what I forget the name of what it was actually called, but it essentially was an armed peacekeeping force from different UN countries. And I believe the Ghanaians distinguished themselves as keeping their force in there. Romeo Dallaire was I believe was from Quebec. Anyway, but yeah, the West just did not, specifically the United States, just did not. I mean, I think there was only one American, literally one American in the country from April to July 1994, when 800,000 Tutsis are being murdered. One. They pulled everybody else out. And he was a missionary. Yeah. He was a missionary.
It's a sore spot for America. Like, didn't they go into Kosovo, or they refer to the Rwandan genocide as something that they should never, like, this is why we need to get involved in stuff. This is why we need to do this.
Yeah, and it was large. Clinton said it's because he was gun shy after Somalia.
Oh, that's why. Okay, I'm getting it.
That was his excuse, but certainly you're right. But later on in 1999, I think there was very little reluctance to jump into that fray because of what had been allowed to happen in Rwanda 5 years before. I'm not sure. I've never interviewed the president.
We can speculate.
We can speculate, though. But it's just this idea that grief is this sodden nightmare that won't let you go. She has a nightmare of these gray, blood-covered hordes coming toward her.
Yeah.
Hutus, right? And then sometimes they merge into one face that leers and just pushes itself against her, and until she wakes up. It's just this, grief is something, until you encounter your Cerberus, as you so wonderfully called that character, who incidentally is a great case of the one case in the story where it's show not tell. It's the opposite. We know very little about him. He's old man with a gray beard and a big straw hat, hanging out in front of what used to be a church, and is now a mausoleum of sorts.
He's the keeper of the dead.
Turned into a mausoleum for the nameless dead.
Like I said, otherworldly. He's like a mythological character.
He's remarkably sure of himself, and you get the sense too that if he is human, which I don't see, it's helpful, perhaps metaphorically, to look at him as a mythological figure. But in story, kind of has you believe he's just a guy, he's a man, but you can just tell this entire lakes of grief in him that he's learned how to live with. And notice how he says our dead. He says our. He's got dead family in there too, and the same as she. But the implication is that she's somehow, and again, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but that the implication is that she, the nameless protagonist, is somehow not alive anymore. Not alive in the way that if there was a glance or a secret handshake or whatever to identify the living to one another, she wouldn't know it anymore. She's somehow not fully alive, and that's really any of us who have suffered trauma and who feel that tremendous crushing grief. You don't feel fully alive. You feel oriented toward the thing which makes you grieve. That's it. You're like a magnet that's stuck. And you become magnetized toward the source of the trauma, and you just vibrate in that direction.
So when did this story get you? Like, when did you start? Because
Oh boy, I
Mm.
know the exact moment. So she's in Paris, like you said. You said before, she's floundering. She's dodging in a way, which is perfectly natural. She doesn't want to face her grief. She goes and grieves at other people's funerals, but of course, there's no rest to be found there. She's just troubling people who are grieving in their own way.
Mm.
So she's like, all right, I got to go back.
Mm.
I've got to go. I've got to go there. I've got to go to Rwanda. So she does, and it's brilliant the way Ms. Mukasonga sets this up. She's dropped off at her old homestead, just downhill from her old homestead in her own home village, which is largely destroyed and depopulated. And she walks uphill, and of course, everything's just destroyed. Like the palisades that were used to to mark the territory of the yard is now alive, which is perverse. It's this idea that it sprang to life, like it started shooting buds and shit after its
Mm.
residents. It's like nature is already crowding in and trying to hide the fact that there ever was a family here. She goes in, the house is destroyed. There's nothing, no artifacts that she can, everything was carried away by the murderers and rapists, the tiles, the bricks, the mortar, everything, the stone. And then Ms. Mukasonga jumps to an earlier period in the day when she went to what made me think of a different nightmare during the Rwandan genocide, which was apparently the Hutus used churches to their advantage. The Christian Tutsis would often run to churches for refuge. And even if they weren't the most stout believers, enough of their friends and relatives were, oh, come on, God will protect us, even if you don't believe in him. Run and hide in the churches. And that's when the Hutus would just come in. And they wouldn't even, quote unquote, waste bullets on these folks because they were already penned in for them. And they'd hack them brutally. They'd drag the women aside and rape them among the blood and then hack their heads and hack. But rape victims were sometimes, this is terrible. A young girl survived Nyarabuye, where at least 2,000 bodies were discovered in May of 1994. She was hacked at, but she didn't die. Her name was Valentina Irigabiza, and the fingers of her right hand were hacked off, and her head was hacked, and she was probably 80 pounds when she just hid among the rats, among the bodies until she was discovered. She was discovered by, I believe, Kigali's troops. Who is the revolutionary who came down? It's a Tutsi. I forget as he became president. I think he's still president of Rwanda. His men found her in the pile of the dead, but this older gentleman in the story is sitting in front of a church where bones are kept of the unidentified dead, the unclaimed dead, as it were, and she shows up. So the preamble for me being very touched by the story is how the Monsignor of that church tried to resume services with a little holy water and cleaning the blood after the bodies had been cleaned up, as it were. He just, some holy water will, and the survivors are outraged. They're like, no, your God left. The white men came, the UN expedition, they came and took the priests, and God went with them. No, this building doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to our dead. And the mayor, who apparently still had some clout, he's like, yeah, get out. It's not a church anymore. It's a memorial now. That's when I was initially touched. But then the older man, the guide, as it were, among the dead, leads her in and says, you belong in here, but you won't find your dead.
That's like the
here.
very
They're
conclusion
inside
of the piece.
Maybe he says that later. Anyway, he does say that to her. The very conclusion. But it's this, he goes,
yeah, don't go. Do not go. You don't want to see.
Don't go looking for your father. Don't go. Do not, you're not going to like where he is. And he says it to her twice. And then this is the narrative genius of that story. Ms. Kukasonga then jumps back to where she's standing. So rather than present it chronologically, where the lesson would have been diluted by space-time, like the process of reading separates you from naturally, your brain is using perhaps the same neurons you just used to read the passage before to overwrite it or clutter it with the thing that you're reading now. So it's this, rather than do it chronologically, she jumps. Homestead, hours before at the church, the Turner Memorial, back to the homestead when she discovers her father's body. What a fucking nightmarish. I mean, it's more devastating than almost anything I've read in fiction. It's the nightmare. It's if this short story is an odyssey, and she's the hero venturing over the troubled waters of her grief toward a reconciliation with the fact of murder and death, then this is where she confronts.
It is an odyssey. It is an odyssey.
This is where
like that.
Well, it's an odyssey as such, but this is where this is the thing that either kills her or drives her mad, which is basically saying the same thing, or this is the thing that she has to internalize in order to become a bigger human being, a real hero, as it were. And she's confronted with her beloved father rotting in a shithole, literally a hole of shit, and she believes that she makes out a vicious leer, a vile, lewd grimace on this, what should be the head, skinless, blackened, evil. Like her father has been polluted so absolutely by the manner of his death that he even appears to her not as pitiful, but as the other itself, as this, his body is now the nightmare that she's been running from. Brilliant. Utterly. And she has to puke because she's got to get it out. It's a little too much.
It's a catharsis.
Too much.
Catharsis
she didn't
means
puke,
to
she'd
puke.
die right there.
Right? Like it's this catharsis for us.
Yeah.
Not for her.
Yeah.
Right? Like the story, and I don't know if you... Yeah. To purge is where the word catharsis comes from. And the story ends, and I thought I had to read it a couple of times it's sort of freeing. I wanted to say uplifting, but I wouldn't say, it's almost happy ending.
It is.
Which is,
it's almost
and it ends very quickly after that moment, right?
It's almost ending.
Because the whole story is just this buildup of pain,
because she's
right. Like it's just this crescendo of grief and of pain, and then at the end, the man, they have that conversation, and you're almost like she can live in the world. She can at least go out into it again. Her soul is greater for having not just gone through that, but having a sort of guided tour, as it were. This man who we don't know anything about except that he's there and we know a little bit about how he looks. He's there, and he's the keeper of the dead. We don't know what his past is. We don't know what his name is. And he just tells her, he says, look, you're not
you're not who you were anymore. Your dead will never leave you, and nor should you want them to. I mean, it's so, it's such, it's like in Bronx Tale when Chaz Palminteri's character Sonny tells C, the protagonist, like, look, it's one of those life lessons that is not easy to get at once. When C is chasing this kid down for $20, and Sonny goes, "What's the matter with you? Are you gonna fucking do you like this kid?" "No, I fucking hate his guts. He owes me $20. You hate his guts. Well, there's your answer right there. You got rid of him for $20. He's out of your life now for $20. It's just the exact. It just ambushes you because you don't. We're taught that good triumphs absolutely here in the West. That there's a narrative that that there will come a time when all debts will be paid, all loose ends will be tied, good will triumph over evil, and that's not real. What is real is that our loved ones get murdered sometimes. Sometimes, if you're as unlucky as our protagonist, your entire country turns on you and you've got to run. And now you feel like a bag of shit because you have survivor's guilt jacked up to 10. And there is no getting rid of your dead, but there is a way to live with them that actually, in a horrifically dialectical way, makes you stronger. It's almost like the old man told her not to look at her father so that she would, and that he would be there to guide her, to try to explain what she just experienced and what she's been experienced. Explain it. That's all. Not say, "Don't worry, it'll all be all right." No, it won't be all right. It won't be all right. You're going to be haunted the rest of your life. But they live in you. They are not. It's not you. It's a burden, the bearing of which makes you stronger, because now they don't have a life aside from being in you. So she has now the responsibility to keep them alive. In other words, you can imagine her responsibility in part, practically, is to someday exorcise that image of her shit-covered, leering, dead father into the man he was when he used to dandle her on his knee, when he perhaps taught her how to ride a bicycle, when he perhaps taught her a trade or read her a bedtime story. That's her job. And now she can clean the shit from his face, as it were, in her memory. She has to learn how to do that. That's her responsibility. But it's also in the same wise that her responsibility can enrich us. I mean, she's now the keeper
she has a
of
purpose,
her entire
right?
family.
Like that was
that
not
no longer
necessarily there before the whole story. And if I saw it as her struggling to grieve, right? Like the whole, like she goes to the church. Probably the section that I liked the most was when her and her friends, after they escape, I think they're in Ghana. I don't remember what country it was at the moment. Yeah, Burundi. And they find a cemetery.
Burundi.
And they just grieve for their loved ones in front of a cemetery of other people, other dead.
Other dead, yeah. I mean, we can't falter there. I mean, we all try to hold off
I
doing
don't
what's
falter
right
for that at
by
all.
trying other things first.
I sympathize so
we all
much with
try
that,
find,
and I
yeah. No, I know.
That's what really got me. That's where I started really caring about these characters, the character, the cemetery scene. Yeah, well, I mean, all of it,
Cemetery
right?
scene.
Like when you just believe her grieving the whole time. It's interesting because, like I said, it feels in many ways like a journal entry. It could have been I. It could have been I the whole time, but things are. Sorry, my computer's doing a bunch of shit. Things like when she goes to the churches in France, cries, they tell her to, like, you can't keep coming here, and then it just goes fine, boom, goes to another scene. Every scene is this escalation of trying to grieve in a way, trying to find a release of it. There's nothing else in the story.
No, that's it. It's very compact. And, I think that's a very faithful representation of what grievers go through. There is nothing else. There's nothing else you pay attention to. I mean, you obviously use the modicum of attention necessary to not get hit by a bus, but perhaps sometimes not. But no other detail is relevant to the story. And, it's pretty faithful to what she probably was thinking. She was only thinking about this. Her entire family brutally murdered by, in effect, her own countrymen. And there's no explaining it. There's no excusing it. There's no changing it. How do you live with it? Well, your dead are with you every step of the way, and it's your responsibility to carry them. And you also you're not really among the land of the living anymore. But at the same time, you are. It's just
No.
devastating.
I was just going to ask you if you've ever written about grief.
Sorry.
Grieving.
Yeah, I have. Jian's gift is, in a sense, a protracted look at the grief of a young man. I had the character. Was I 30 when I started writing that? Oh my God. Anyway, but the character is based on me, and he was about 30 at the time, and it's just a single day in his life where he's trying to
It's a different type of grieving. It's a grieving for
hope
the loss of a love
that he had to be. Yeah, and the loss that he fully deserved, and that it's not as if in this case he feels guilty because he did fuck it up. It was his fault. But have you?
Not everything. Kind of feels like when you say that to me, I kind of want to be like, yeah, everything's kind of grief. Everything's kind of grieving over something, the loss of something, a change in something, Glad's Estate is about, in many ways, a man who doesn't want to confront the fact that his wife is dying. Because he doesn't want to go through that. He doesn't want to grieve, because grieving, it's painful to deal with the reality. I guess a lot of my stuff that would have to do with grief is trying to avoid it. Because I'm white. That's what we do. Yeah. Confront emotions? No, thank you.
Because we believe. I think more often than not, we believe it goes away. We believe there's a way to transmute it, as it were. You have to go through this step-by-step process, and it's even more interesting because we've almost enshrined this in science, that there is a process that the brain, not just white people's brains, but this ecumenical human brain, and we all go through it. But the expression of each stage is obviously different according to culture. But there is this rather puerile notion among many affluent Westerners in particular that grief can go away, that there's a way to work it away, exercise it away, or take supplements and it'll go away, or fuck it away, or drink it away. I mean, interestingly enough, in American popular country music, like not real country, but pop country, that it's like that's one of its major themes is drinking your problems away. And incidentally, that was also a feature of blues as well. But I don't. It's interesting that in this story, which is literally called Grief, grief is a tool. Ultimately, if we want to perhaps distill it down a little too much to one, it can be helpful in a way. It's not just a curse. It's a crucible in a way that you pass through, and you're changed utterly. So now you're yourself plus grief.
Because she didn't have to go back.
Oh, she did though.
No.
She did.
She did, but she
did.
What I mean by that, like, no, she recognizes that, but there was nothing forcing her to get on a plane, nothing forcing her to get there, right? Like, there's another version of this story.
I beg to disagree. I think everything that happens in Paris is forcing her to go there.
I guess I'm not articulating myself correctly. Like, I'm picturing like another version of this, right? Like,
all right,
someone else may not have gone, right? Somebody else may
they live in that limbo forever.
Yeah, that's what in that purgatory.
Yeah,
that's what I'm meaning by that, right? Like, and just trying to cope with it. But she went through the crucible.
It would, interestingly enough, it wouldn't have been purgatory, would it? It would have been hell.
It would have been hell. Yeah, it would have been,
because in purgatory the fire is cleansing. In hell, it just burns. It doesn't change you. It doesn't. You just suffer. At least in purgatory, the suffering has a purpose. You're getting washed, as it were.
Did you notice pain. That this was very much written for like a Western audience? Did you feel the same thing?
Oh yeah. Like when there's like almost a derogatory term for white people, buzungas, whatever, and that had to be translated by the writer, rather than just say, oh, these buzungas are going to come and sign this book like it's a fucking hotel or whatever. Like, they had to say buzunga or white people, or whatever. I think it was definitely written with consciously knowing it would be in the New Yorker, for sure.
I felt that it was kind of pulling on these, like when you said like an Odyssey. No, did you say Odyssey before? Like, there's these old Western, like Western as in the Greek mythology type thing, aspects to this piece that made it seem like it was for us to kind of put her grief in a way that we historically understand these types of stories in a way, the types of horrors that I went through. Like, you could almost see like I said, a Cerberus, or the dude who, what's his name? He's in a boat from Greek mythology.
Charon.
Charon. Yeah. I almost saw him like that as well. It's there are these elements to it, that these rituals that are connected to death and grieving that are kind of in it to help us to find it more accessible, I feel. And I really appreciated that, because it's just such a great story.
Well, many groups of people have their own stories about a hero who must venture out to see how the world really is and to learn how to deal with it. One can think of the Buddha, the 4 things that he saw when he finally left the palace, and then his journey to learn how to live with those truths, to learn how to learn how to live knowing that you would basically getting tits on your face and wine poured over your naked body for your whole life. He was 29 when he set out. He wasn't some naive boy when he left the palace. He's fucking 29. Or you take Jesus Christ, the journey that he went on, the journey through the wilderness, being tempted by the great dread spirit, the great knowing spirit, the dark spirit of knowledge that we equate with Satan. This idea that his soul had to be proven true by correctly answering this powerful spirit's questions, and then journeying through Jerusalem to his death. And I'm sure the Tutsis have their own stories. And if not, then if she knows French, then she certainly had an earful of of interesting Greek stories recycled from French, as it were.
Do you have a favorite line in closing?
Ooh, I don't know. I don't remember. I don't remember any specific lines. Perhaps the last one. I think maybe the last one where, you do you have the story open?
I can grab it. I have it right here. The beautiful cover of this New York too.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, but I would say the last line where it basically distills, like, he's kind of sends her forth.
Now the guardian of the dead said, "What is there for you to fear?" That's the last
exactly.
line.
Yeah, what is there for you to fear? You've been to hell. You've seen it. Your own father was your nightmare. Like, now you got nothing to fear now. It's just you've seen and lived the worst that there is. Yeah. How about you?
I really like the line about, she's almost away. I read it. She imagined them beyond a veil of tears, nearby and unreachable. Maybe that's why she'd go so far away, so there would be someone to weep for all those whose memory the killers had tried to erase. I just really like that kind of construction. I like the beyond a veil, like imagine them beyond a veil of tears. I like the idea of a veil of tears. I thought that was
what's interesting too is that that's her thought before she really knows what's going on.
Yeah.
It's still her trying to, as it were, defer her journey back home. Because, as we learn at the end of the story, they aren't beyond a veil of tears and unreachable. They live inside her.
They live inside her.
And the killers were not trying to erase her past. They didn't know who she was, nor did they care. They were just out to rape and murder and steal and feel good for a moment. That's all. There was no grand plan among the Atarahamwe. They were just out for settling scores.
And on that
having a
note,
good time.
ladies and gentlemen, I'm Darryl. He's Brett. We're boozing. Keep scribbling, my brethren and sisters of the pen.